Hey guys, it's Benjamin with Benjamin's Exotics, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about ball python spurs, and more specifically, what to do if your ball python spurs fall off. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about ball python spurs, and more specifically, what to do if your ball python spurs get broken off or fall off. Now this is a weird phenomenon that hasn't been expressed too much and hasn't been talked about nearly as much as I think it should have been in the ball python community. So we're going to look at some ball pythons today in my own collection that have either lost one of their spurs, both of their spurs, and we're going to talk about all the elements of a spur on a snake. So what is a spur? What am I talking about in today's video? So a spur is basically this. Let's grab a good female that has some nice long spurs that will be good for the camera. A spur is essentially on a boa or python, but again, not all boas and pythons have to have these, but it is a bony kind of limb, or a bony, I guess you could call it, I don't know what you'd call it. It's like a ligament, an appendage. It's this little bony thing that sticks out on either side of the snake's cloaca, and it essentially is the ancient remains of what would have been legs when snakes have evolved from lizards. Now they of course do not walk on them anymore. They don't really have any huge use for them, but these spurs can be used for breeding. Some have very long spurs like this, some have thicker spurs, some have smaller spurs. Now what happens with age, I think, is that these spurs aren't covered in a layer of scales, unlike the scales in the eyes on the snake. So over time, I think these spurs kind of just wear down, they get old, they get frail, they get brittle, and then all that has to happen is just a little bit of pressure has to be applied to the spur in the wrong way, and it actually breaks off. So let's go ahead and look at a ball python that actually is missing one of its spurs. Okay, so here's a male ball python that has lost not only one, but actually both of his spurs. Now let me actually grab a probe just so I can kind of point to what I'm talking about on the screen. So as you can see, unlike that female, which had both spurs full length on both sides of the vent, this guy's spurs have just broken off completely. I don't know how well the camera is going to pick it up, but on both sides, the spurs have broken off. And it's actually kind of interesting how this happened. I can say, I don't remember which one fell off first. I think it was the one on the left. But basically, about a year ago, I paired this guy up to or actually no, it was more than a year ago. I paired this guy up to a pastel female that we'll also look at in a second, and the first time I paired him up, he lost one of his spurs, because they do use their spurs while breeding to kind of court the female and manipulate her tail for breeding. So I was like, that's kind of weird, and then I think I bred him like 2 or 3 more times, and then on the 3rd or 4th breeding, his other spur also fell off. So it's kind of a bummer that he lost both of them so quickly. But as you can see, instead of having that big, long, bony appendage, there's just a little kind of almost stump looking thing remaining on either side of the tail. Now, here's the interesting thing. If these are indeed legs, as people have been saying for the longest time, that these are the ancient remains of legs, in theory, when you chop off a leg, or a leg falls off of something like a gecko, obviously don't do this, but if you were to chop a gecko's leg off, it's not going to grow back, okay? They're not like salamanders or some frogs where they have these huge, crazy regenerative abilities where they can actually regenerate the leg that is lost. But this is where it gets kind of interesting, because on the ball pythons, they do actually regenerate their spurs. It takes incredibly long, and I don't even know if you can see on the screen, but the spur on this side has just barely started growing back. You can see right there, hopefully you can see, there's actually a hook on the spur that is starting to grow back as that was the first one that broke off, whereas the one on the other side is kind of still just a broken stump and really hasn't grown back nearly as much. Now you see how broken and how short the spur looks like on this male, but now let's actually look at a female that has almost, I would say she's regenerated her spur almost halfway, and let's actually look at the female that he was bred to. So I said that this male lost both of his spurs while breeding a pastel female, and she also dropped one of her spurs while breeding. It was a really weird thing. They were like just dropping them like crazy. So here is that pastel female, and if I remember it correctly, I think she lost the left spur. Let's see. If we look at her tail, yeah, so it's going to be the left spur that she lost. So as you can see, it's kind of a halfway point. So unlike that male, she still has one of her original spurs from a baby that is the normal length, which you can see on, if the camera will focus, you can see on the right, that would be like a normal length of a spur, but on this side, you can see the spur has been broken off, or at least it was broken off. When a spur breaks off, it almost looks essentially like you cut down a tree and it's just a stump left. It doesn't really show much remains except that, but look at this spur. It's been well over a year since she's lost this, but since losing that first initial spur, it has started growing back. All of this growth right here, so from here all the way up to the point of this small spur was gone. It had completely broken off, and over time this small nodule that remained had grown all of this back, which is very interesting. So personally, I think this means, and this kind of signals, that we might have had a misunderstanding of the purpose of spurs and how important they really are for ball pythons. So I think it's interesting to find that even though these spurs are supposedly not of any real importance to the ball pythons and are not really using them on a constant basis, that they're still taking the effort to actually grow the spur back after it's been broken or fallen off. I think it's very interesting, and I think it might paint a bigger picture into the actual importance of spurs for ball pythons and the use of them in their breeding processes. Now these are just a few of the ball pythons in my collection that I've lost their spurs, and I certainly have many more than this, and it seems to be, again, like I said in the beginning of the video, a thing with age. I have never had a ball python, or any snake for that matter, under the age of 3 lose a spur to breeding or some other activity. It just doesn't happen. So I think naturally over time, and I've even seen this with wild-caught adult pythons and boas, they come in and their spurs are broken off even from the wild. So I think it's just an age thing, that literally over time their spurs just get brittle, they get worn down, and they just break off, and then over, you know, maybe 3, 4, 5 years, they grow back to their full size. Now I will say, many people might be concerned about this, especially if it's happening to your pet. I have seen no differences in ball pythons' breeding abilities or their health in general. I have ball python males, like I showed you, that male spider. He has no spurs at all, and he still breeds every single female I put him in with. I see no difference in feeding. I don't think it affects the animal's health at all. Now, of course, if for some reason you accidentally tore out the entire spur with the muscle beneath and an infection was caused, that's a different story. But generally, for what I'm talking about, where the spur, you come in one day and it's literally just fallen off of your ball python, I don't think there's any negative health consequences for that animal. And as long as, you know, you make sure that it isn't the muscle that's been ripped out and it's just the bony spur that's fallen off, I think your ball python is going to be completely fine, and it shouldn't affect your ball python's health in any negative way in the future. So hopefully you guys did enjoy, and most importantly benefit from today's video. Again, this is kind of a weird topic that isn't talked about very much in the ball python community, so hopefully if you're experiencing this with your pet ball python, this video helped sum some things up and make a few things about this whole spur issue a bit more clear. If you guys did enjoy today's video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.